This analysis video is for Jeremy. Jeremy, hey, thanks for submitting the face on. So in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about the release. I'm pretty much only going to focus on the release and what I want you to work on. Now, we're going to get into some pretty good details. So in this format of talking you through based on pictures, it's easy to have miscommunication. So please, let me know if everything makes sense, and let me know what happens when you start trying to implement. Okay, so the release for me is basically going to be from right around in this area here, what I call delivery position, all the way until follow through right about there. So it's basically when you're transferring all the speed and energy you've created during transition from the grip out to the club head. So there's a couple things, both what the arms are doing and what the body's doing, that kind of work together in your pattern. And I'm going to show you that it's a pattern that you weren't really using in the past, and I think is definitely contributing to your struggles with the long game. So over on the right, we have our model Sergio, and over on the left we have one of the videos you submitted recently. Now your sequencing during transition is looking better. In this particular one, did a great job continuing to cover with the chest. Now what we'll see is that as you go to release, from the down the line camera, the thing that's going to look kind of odd or out of sorts is we're going to see that there's some changes going on here in your upper body. So what we'll see is that as you go to release, I want you to watch your head and your right shoulder. And you'll see that as you go through this release, in an effort to not take too deep of a divot or an effort to shallow the club out, you end up losing some of your right side bend and going into a little bit more towards left side bend, so that head starts working up. We'll see a little bit more from the face-on view, which will help us understand why the club tends to exit so low. Now, if we look at Sergio from that perspective, so if we're just looking at essentially where is his head and where is his upper body, what you'll see is most golfers are going to continue right side bending, squeezing their hips, going into extension until the end of the follow through right around here. And it's that hips closer to the target, body right side bending that gets the arms to take the club more up along the path as it exits, instead of finishing low left. When let me zoom in a little bit here. When we take a look at your face on, this is why I wanted the face on, because there's really only one kind of way that that's going to work. What we'll tend to see is, instead of having any amount of real bracing with that upper body and kind of starting to actually tilt this way to help get your arms to extend that way through the shot, your upper body is going to continue drifting forward. So that would create a really steep angle of attack if you didn't also lose that right side bend. So what ends up happening is, when you get into this kind of follow through or finish position, your lower body and your upper body are pretty much right on top of each other. So if we look at younger Jeremy, we'll see that as he comes through in that release position, you'll see that right shoulder continue working down and going into right side bend, which gets the club to swing up a little bit more, slightly shallower, more in line with the plane line. From the face-on view, and you'll see this primarily with the longer clubs, for most golfers. Once you get to right about here, as you go into that extension, or as you go into the release, if we just kind of mark where that upper body is, you'll see that that upper body, if anything, actually works away from the target. So when you get to that follow through, you can see that there's a really good clear kind of angle, which gives your foot something to basically push against and brace against. when your upper body gets totally on top of your lower body like this, that would cause a steep angle of attack unless you had more of kind of a flip release. So that's part of the reason why your hands tend to have a little bit more of that forearm rotation and finish very much low left. So what ends up happening is when we get to this follow through, you can see that younger Jeremy does a great job of having those arms extend, and the club is almost in line with that right forearm at shaft parallel. Here what we'll see is, because the body wasn't really bracing, when he gets the shaft parallel, there's still a pretty good angle. So the club would be, if it was a little bit more of this body release, you would have the club a little bit more in line with the forearms, a little bit more ulnar deviation, and then the body would be bracing against the ground this way. Now that combination sounds complicated, but it actually gives a much more shallow path and angle of attack. So that shallowness is what's going to help a lot with the longer clubs, where when your upper body's on top of your lower body, it's almost impossible not to get steep. So now over on the right, we can just kind of confirm what we're trying to do. There you see Sergio's upper body starting to work away from the target. Now it's not that the upper body is just falling back away, it's actually getting pushed there by what's happening with his left leg and his left hip. But as a result, when he gets to that follow-through position, again, you'll see, just like younger Jeremy had, you'll have this very clear angle between the upper body, lower body, and foot that gives the foot a good platform to push against in what I call bracing, and that helps propel the arms to extend and release out more towards the target, instead of, again, what we're seeing here is if the lower body was pretty much just a little bit more forward, but the upper body was a little bit more back, then this arm position would actually happen right about here. You can imagine that this is kind of tilting backward like this. That means these hands and these arms, instead of being down low left, would actually be a little bit more up to the right. So if you start working on this and the ball is just kind of flaring off to the right and you're hitting more of a block, then what that means is that you're using some of this upper body lunge to help square the face. If that's the case, you just have to add a little bit more shaft rotation kind of down through some of this area to try and help close the face with a more shallow path. Because right now you're using, the combination that you have is the upper body gets on top, the forearms kind of rotate from underneath, and so they don't really ulnar deviate or extend. So it kind of has this covering look from the down the line, but it has this narrow look through the wrist, kind of in this position where they've rehinged rather quickly. So again, let me know if any of this doesn't make sense, but I'll include some videos to kind of help you figure out some of this bracing component and how that's going to relate to the bottom of the swing. That should get the initial launch up quicker for your longer clubs, and help get more of a sweet spot contact for especially the driver, but also, you know, hybrids, long irons, that kind of stuff. So again, let me know if you have any questions. Hopefully this makes sense, because I think this is going to be really key for getting you back to where younger Jeremy was the world beater.